Well, good morning. For those of you I have not had a chance to meet, my name is Andrew Yates. I am here on staff at Dallas Theological Seminary as the advisor to men and coordinator for global discipleship. And I am so excited to introduce today Dr. John Tolson. This man has had a tremendous impact in my life personally, but also here at DTS. Him and his family and his ministry has invested in this school tremendously. And I'm going to terrify the chaplain's office, and I'm not going to read anything here because I'm just going to say what I know about this man. He has ministered longer than I have been alive, being very intentional to invest. And his ministry, the Tolson Group, that he and his wife, Punky, have founded. I believe Punky's here. Would you wave so we can welcome you and thank you? And some members of his board, I believe, are as well are here. Would y'all join me in welcoming the Tolson Group leadership? Thank you very much. But I could talk about the accolades about how Dr. Tolson has met with and led so many people worldwide. I could talk about his investment in the very first chaplaincy in the NBA, or his role with the Dallas Cowboys, or the 1,000 of men through the gathering of men that have come to faith, or I could talk about his publications. But the thing that I'm most proud about is he has invested, I was doing the math this morning, which is tough for an Aggie like me, but over 500 students here at DTS in the last 4 years have been discipled one-on-one, either directly by him or by women and men that he has invested in, prepared to not only be discipled, but to make disciples for the rest of their lives. And I'm a better man. I'm a better husband. I'm a better father because of your personal investment in my life. And I thank you for that. And I'm very excited for what he has to share with us today. Would you join with me in welcoming Dr. John Tolson?
Pretty good. That's great. I'll be there in a minute. Y'all just take a break. We'll get there. Kind of got to ease into this stuff. You can't get too excited. Y'all excited? You taking a nap yet? Okay. I used to take naps in chapels. I don't know if they do that here or not, but anyway. All right. Somebody sent this to me not too long ago, and I wanted to share it with you. And I think it makes a point. An eminent historian, Dr. Wellington Koo, was giving a presentation at an Ivy League school. On short notice, they knew he was going through the country and begged him to come and lecture at the school. They put the event together, they advertised it, all the students came into the room and the great hall, and they had a dinner, and then he was supposed to talk. Dr. Koo, being a very humble Chinese person, couldn't bring himself to sit at the head table. And he begged them, please, I just want to sit out where the people are. I'll sit in the back. I don't need to sit up front. And so Koo didn't realize this, but all the tables, the people that came, always sat at the same table. So he went in the back, and there was one seat with this group of guys. He didn't know that it was one of the fraternities in the school. So he sat down. The president of that fraternity is sitting right next to him. And so they're kind of having conversation around the table and kind of bragging about some of the stuff they've accomplished and so forth. And finally, the president feels he should say something to this little Chinese man. And he looks at Dr. Koo and he says, "You like a soupy?" Well, Dr. Koo simply smiled and nodded his head. When the time came when the dinner was over and the president stood up and was getting ready to introduce him, he gives all his credentials. And finally, he said, "We are honored to have him here with us today, Dr. Wellington Koo." Well, the place went crazy, except the fraternity president. He had no idea that that guy was the speaker. And so he gets up and in almost flawless English gives one of the most articulate, one of the most accurate talks on Sino-Soviet relations. Not my favorite devotion, but anyway, after he was done, he said, "Thank you," to a thunderous applause and a standing ovation. He walked back to the table and to his seat and sat down. And he said, "I just couldn't resist it." So he looked at the president of the fraternity, and he said, "You like speechy?" Well, I hope you'll like my speechy today. And I'm not here to waste your time. I'm here to make a difference, and for some of you, it's going to change the course of the rest of your life. You come to these things, and you've got great speakers. They teach the Bible word for word. They upside down in every way, which we got to do. But let me tell you, there's more to it than just that. So that's what I want to talk about today. The question is, what was Jesus' plan to change the planet? Did he have a plan? Well, let's talk about that. If you look at Matthew chapter 4, verse 17, he picks a core of people and he tells the first message, not a real popular message, he says, repent. I would put turn or burn, dunk or flunk or whatever, but he said, repent. It was a tough message. And then he gave them a challenge. And he said, I want to follow me and I want to make you fishers of men or women. Boom. And then he goes to Matthew 5 through chapter 7, the Sermon on the Mount, and he begins to dig deep and gets that spiritual scalpel to go inside to change them from the inside out, to replace it with his character, not their own character. And the point was, what a disciple is will determine what a disciple does. If you're not getting it together on the inside, you're going to be minimalized on the outside in the impact you'd like to have for him. So, what was his plan? Here was the plan. Pick 12 men, 3 years. That was a plan. That was a plan. And we come up with all these extravaganzas and pack them in stadiums, which I've spoken at some of those. It's great. That has a role. But he didn't just pick 12 men by accident. He did it on purpose. So my summary is this. Either that plan was stupid or it was supernatural. And I believe it was supernatural. I think he knew exactly what he was doing. So he sets this movement in motion. He dies. He's buried. 3 days later, he pulls one of the greatest political coups of all history. He gets up from the dead. He goes to Galilee, to the mountain. He calls all the disciples beforehand to meet him there. They come in, and he utters these famous words. And by the words, last words are lasting words. Last words are lasting words. So in Matthew 28:19, he says very directly to them, go and make disciples. I believe go make disciples. I believe that 3 of the most misunderstood words in the book are those 3 words. His plan is what he did with those 12, and then he passed the baton to them and said, now you got it. You go do what I did with you and get those people ready so they can do with others what you did with them on down through 2025. You say, well, we're doing a pretty good job with that. We're not doing a good job with that. And that's why I'm here today. So the question is, what is a disciple? What does it mean in Matthew 28 when he said, go make disciples? What does that mean? Well, years ago, when Vince Lombardi was coaching the Green Bay Packers, the first of the season, when they had their first meeting, he pulled them all together, probably 50, 60, 70 guys until they made the cuts, and he'd stand up in front of them, he'd hold a football out, and he said, gentlemen, this is a football. Why did he do that? Because he did not want them to get distracted. They were there to play the game. So what I'm going to do today is hold something else in front of you. What does it mean to make a keyword disciple? The word Christian is only mentioned 3 times in the New Testament. The word disciple, all depends on what translation you use, approximately 269 times. So if something is mentioned 269 times, I was a PE major, I was kind of slow, but that's pretty important. So I better figure out what the heck it means. So if you do, and you all are researchers, if you look all those words up 269 times, do your due diligence, take all of the research, drop at the top of the funnel, out of the bottom of the funnel drops 3 things it means. First of all, and you ought to have been raised like this. You ought to know, if I push you, you ought to know these things. So from now on, know these things. Number 1, A disciple is a learner. Disciple is a learner. To know and not to do is not to know at all. True learning only takes place when it changes how I live. The problem is, a lot of us have a lot of information, but we have very little transformation. His whole point is to change our lives so we can become more like Jesus. Know what the book says, do what the book says. I love John 5 when they ran out of wine, and Jesus' mother is talking to the servants, and that verse 5, brilliant statement. She says, just do what he tells you to do. That's it. Let's don't complicate this thing. Let's make it down to earth where we live every day. Read it, understand it, go do it. Read it, understand it, go do it. Boy, if we could just up our game 10% on that one, we'd change the planet. The second thing a disciple is a follower. It kind of has behind it the concept of an adhesive. It's something that sticks to something else. I stick to him. I'm not the leader. He's the leader. I follow him. And the demands of following Jesus are extremely challenging. So how you doing on that one? But number 3, the third thing a disciple is in the New Testament is where we've dropped the ball. I have a lot of friends that meeting with a guy last night, and he devours everything he could get from the scripture, reading books. He said, he's 73 years old. I want to know more. I want to know more. But here's where we drop the ball. The third thing a disciple is a reproducer. It's taking what someone has built into you and intentionally, by the grace of God, trying to live by those principles. And then number 3, begin to build that in somebody else who then will understand it, try to live it, and intentionally build it in somebody else. The original person is taking somebody else, and that's the way this thing rolls. So, I think what I see a lot in Dallas, and I've been here a long time, a lot in Dallas, we have theological trucks that back up to a church, and they dump all their information out, and it's good information. Nothing necessarily wrong with it, but then they pull off and say, well, we discipled you. That is not discipling. That is a dump of information. And so sometimes I think we're educated way beyond our intelligence. You ought to laugh on that. We know more than we do. So when you walk out of here, somebody pushes you, out comes a verse, out comes a theological point or whatever. But the question is, what are we doing to live the discipling lifestyle? Let me ask you a question. Who discipled you? Number 2, who have you discipled? Sometimes people say, well, how do you know if these people really understand it? One simple question. Go up to somebody. You can do it here before you leave. Who's your man? Who's your woman? Who are you discipling? If you don't have an answer to that, you don't get it. So we need to understand that this was a command by Christ, not a suggestion in Matthew 28. This is a life-changing deal. So, a number of years ago, I went to Atlanta to meet with one of the great preachers in America. He's with the Lord now, Dr. Charles Stanley. And I met at his home with 3 friends, and after dinner, he said, well, I know you guys are here for some reason. So I went over the learner, follower, reproducer and explained it. A few moments later, he put his hand on my arm. He's 93 at the time, preached all over the world, prolific in his preaching, in his books. And he said, John, you mind if I say something? I said, absolutely not. And he said, no one ever did that with me, and I've never discipled one person. One of the greatest Bible teachers on the planet. 85 to 90%, according to new recent surveys that have come out, say that only 5 to 10% of the pastors in America have ever been discipled. That means somebody's taken them on, not doing a little Bible study, but have taken them on, walked through life on life, and walked with them for a period of time and laid a faith foundation in their life that they could live by and transfer to somebody else. If you go to whatever church you go to, try it on Sunday morning. Go up and down the pew and say, I want to interview you for 2 minutes. Give me the essentials of your faith. I guarantee a lot of people are going to be struggling. But we assume because they're at church and they got a Bible that they understand all that. They don't. A number of years ago, I do a luncheon in Highland Park. We've got about 200-300 people that come over the last 20 years. And I asked a really good friend of mine to come up for 5 minutes and say something about disciple making before I was going to talk on that subject. So he comes up. He's a very creative and crazy guy. He stands up, looks around, and asks this question. Anybody here raised in an orphanage? Well, the place went silent. A few minutes later, right-hand table, guy raised his hand. He said, you mind if I ask you a question in front of all these people? He said, no, it's no problem at all. He said, when you were in that orphanage and you knew that a visitor or visitors were coming that day, what were you thinking? He said, that's simple. Please pick me. And then he looked out at the audience. He said, most of you go to some well-known famous church in Dallas. He said, let me tell you something. You go to those churches, you're going to find it very difficult to find somebody to pick you. They run programs, but they don't raise up pickers. Pickers is what this thing is all about. So, I'm just going to slip through a bunch of stuff here. Here's what people say to me. I can't do it. I can't do this discipling stuff. First of all, I didn't even understand what it is. Nobody ever did it with me. But those who do say, okay, I'm ready, let's go. Others say, nah. What is their excuse? Let me give you a couple. Number one, they say, well, really, I'm just too busy. I don't have time to do this. If you're too busy and you love Jesus and you're too busy to this, you're too busy. The second, I'm not called. That's well, I'm not called either. I'm commanded. I'm commanded as a follower of Jesus to make disciples who make disciples who make disciples. I don't know enough. You'll never know enough. If you know one verse, go share that one verse with somebody. That's no excuse. Or, I don't want to be a fanatic. All I want to do is just kind of get my ticket punched so I can go to heaven, and then, I'll leave it up to the pros, the preachers. That's what they're supposed to do. They're supposed to be the disciple makers. Wrong again. By the way, if you look at all the spiritual gift list in the New Testament, you'll never see there listed the gift of making disciples. It's not a spiritual gift. I'm sure you learned that all here at the school. So anyway, what is the process? The process, you get discipled, you let somebody build their life into you and whatever their format is, and we've got a format that I'll suggest to you, and then you say, okay, not only do I know some things, but these principles, by the grace of God, I'm going to live by them. And then number two, I'm going to invest that in other people. So who are your disciples? When you meet with the Lord someday and he says, hey, where are they? I told you to do this. Where are they? If you don't have anybody behind you, and what we do now will determine who's going to be standing beside us and behind us then. So who are you building your life into? That is the key. So now I want to use the rest of my time, most of it, giving you some examples. Some of us believe, well, nobody does this. Oh, you just don't know. You just don't know. Let me give you a couple of them. So when we started with Dr. Yarborough about 5 years ago, and George Hillman said, we want you and your wife to help us start discipling our students. So we made a run at it. In the first year, I think we had about 85 students online and here in the city, and this was during COVID, that signed up. So we got 75, 85 people from all over Dallas and other cities that we knew we either trained them or they could do it. They were far enough along in their faith. So one of these guys was Steve. Steve is an old cowboy. He lives in Forney, Texas. Steve wears cowboy hats, starch pants, starch shirt, got a mustache. He is country as they could come. I said, Steve, I want you to take this guy up in New York or wherever he lived. It's going to be FaceTime or Zoom. Are you in? And Steve said, I'm in. A month later, I get a call from Steve. Steve said, John, I can't do this. I said, what? He said, this guy's smart. I said, does that mean you're dumb? Now you say, you don't talk. Yeah, I talk like that to people that ought to know better. I kick them in the behind. Let's go. Quit sitting in that cushion. Let's get it going. So I said, Steve, you can do this. 9 months later, Steve calls me. John, this is Steve. I just graduated the guy today, and before, he was the head of all ammunition and gun deals that our country makes with other countries, and I passed the baton. He's already got his guy to disciple, and he said, you know what he's doing now? He is head of cybersecurity for all of our embassies all over the world. And I said, how about that? Steve Hatfield from Forney, Texas. Man, you did it, didn't you? And he's never stopped. He's got his whole church, his Baptist church in Forney, making disciples who make disciples, including the head pastor who needs to be the one that models it out for everybody else. Let me give you another one. Larry O'Donnell graduated from this institution a few years ago. He ran a worldwide company called Waste Management, worldwide. We have a friend here, I have a friend here that discipled him through our process called the 4 Priorities out of Matthew 22. He is in Austin, Texas now, and all he does is disciple pastors and young guys and gets them moving to multiply. He said, I'll spend the rest of my life doing this. It's a powerful guy. But he's humble enough to say, I want to do what Jesus said to do. Let me give you another one. How about Terry? Now, this is a good one. So a few years ago, I was in Jackson, Mississippi. They had about 600 pastors together, and they were getting ready to put this big event on in a stadium in Jackson. And so they wanted me to take 5-6 minutes and say something about disciple making, which I did. When it was over, they gave everybody, all 600 pastors, one of our books just to sow the seed and get them to think about disciple making. So when I got back to Dallas, my assistant said, man, somebody they got a fire lit them up on them or under them over there in Jackson. I said, well, they ordered 100 books and then another 100 and then 50. And then I said, I got to find out who this is. So next time I'm over, I found out who it was, and we're having breakfast one morning. He's kind of a short little guy, kind of balding, probably in his mid-40s, could lose a little weight, but absolutely delightful. I said, Terry, how'd you get to be a preacher? Oh, man, he said, John, it's quite a background. He said, I was a bouncer in a bar, and I bounced right into Jesus. Boom. Do you have those kind of people you're working with? That's the game right there. And so I said, well, let me ask you about these books. You bought 100, then 50, another 100. I said, are you jacking the price up and making you some personal money? What are you doing? He said, no. He said, let me tell you what happened. I heard you speak for 6 or 7 minutes. I got my book when I left. I went back to my office. I closed the door, and I said, Lord, how did I miss this? How did I miss disciple making? How did I miss it? I said, what'd you do? He said, I picked a guy and got him a book. We went through it, and I told him, just like you said, I cannot take you on if you're not willing to take somebody else on, at least one person a year, the rest of your life. And you ask of them the same thing I ask of you. And what's that? He said, well, we haven't put anything in the bulletin yet. He said, we haven't made any announcements from the pulpit. And just word of mouth, we've got over 100 people that are now discipling other people through the 4 priorities. And still, that was 4 or 5 years ago. Every month or two, we need another box of books. We need another box of books. Man, I like that. I like Terry Fant. He is a rock star in my eye. One more. Sometimes people think, well, you get old, you just kind of prop it up and listen to Christian music and doze off whenever you want to doze off. Listen, some of the greatest disciple makers I know have been people from 75 to 95. So an old man, had lunch with him one day, about 3 or 4 years ago. His name was Ed. A friend wanted me to meet him. So we're sitting at this lunch place. He came in on a walker. And this guy said he really is interested in disciple making. And he comes in on a walker. Now, I didn't say this out loud, but I'm saying, come on, man. You got to give me somebody that's got some life left in him. He's on a daggone walker. Sits down. Little did I know what was going to be in store for me. He said, well, boy, tell me about that disciple making. So I told him a little bit. He said, well, I've been a lawyer for 47 years in Dallas, And he said, our church and many of the churches that I know, we're not doing this. But there's going to come a time in our country where it's going to really get bad. And if we're not doing this to multiply, we're in trouble. I said, I agree with you. Gave him a copy of the book. And I said, Ed, why don't you read this? Call me up when you finish. A week later, he calls me. He said, John, I finished that book. I said, you read the whole book? I read it all. He said, that's good. That's really good. Really good. I said, well, I appreciate that. He said, what do I do now? I said, I thought you read the book. It's in chapter 28. Did you not get that far? Are you faking me out? He said, no, I have to go back. So I gave him a few review things. He said, okay, I'll get busy. He calls me every week for a month. He said, John, I'm giving you an update. This is how it's going. I said, okay. He said, you got to pick some people. So about 3 months later, I said, I got to go see Ed and see if he's doing anything. So I go to his high rise on Northwest Highway, 17th floor. He and his 91-year-old, they were 91 at the time, he and his 91-year-old wife met me at the door. And the look and the smile and the radiance on their face, if I make it to that far, I hope I got that going on. So I sat down with him and said, what you got, Ed? He said, well, I got 5 guys. I said, you what? He said, I got 5 guys. So I'm thinking they're all probably 85 or 90 years old. I said, how old are they? 3 in their 30s, 150, 160. He calls me up a little bit later, a month or two later, said, I'm in the hospital. He said, I was feeling weak. They put a pacemaker in. I'm going back home tomorrow, and the guys are starting to come up one at a time, every week, 5 of them, 5 one-on-ones, 91 years old. So he calls me up about a month later. He said, John, I got to ask you a favor. I said, Bub, I'll do anything for you. I've never met anybody like you on the planet. He said, if I die before I finish with these 5 guys, will you take them on, finish them up, and get them out there? I said, yes, sir, I will do that. I'll give you my word I will do that. So in 21, in January, he called and said, well, I passed the baton to all 5. They've all got their guys. They're out there discipling. I got 3 more at the end of February. We're going to start with them. Boom. Well, I get a phone call in the middle of February, and one of his closest friends, Dan Arnold, said, well, Ed just went home to be with the Lord. I said, oh, Dan. I said, can you imagine this? Can you imagine? He's got 5 crazy guys, business leaders around the city that are going to be impacting people now that he's gone. He's killing it through those 5 guys. What do you got behind you? Who have you built your life into? And I could go on and on. Tim Keller, the great pastor from New York and writer, spoke at this chapel a couple years ago. And he said, preaching alone will not get it done. We need great preaching and teaching. But we also need to do in our preaching and teaching, when we get to Matthew 28, how are we doing with that one? How are we doing with 2 Timothy 2:2, and the things you have heard me say in the presence of many witnesses, entrust or make a deposit to reliable or faithful men or women who will be grateful and will be qualified to teach others also, who then will be able to teach others also. One of my heroes, that used to be in this school, who's with the Lord, Howard Hendricks. He said, if we're not making disciples who are making disciples who are making disciples, we're simply not doing what Jesus said to do. And so the question becomes, then what are we going to do? What's the plan? What's the plan? Well, we've come up with a simple little plan. I'm not here to push the plan, but the plan's right out of this book, and everything in this book is out of this book. And what we've discovered is people need a simple guide. If I give them a Bible and say, go disciple somebody, where do they start? What if you just love the Lord, but you're not a theological graduated student? They're going to drown. They're not going to have any confidence. There are over 1,000 verses in this little book. Matthew 22, 4 things. Jesus said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and soul, and strength. The second commandment is like the first, love your neighbors, you love yourself. So number 1, love him. Make sure you got that relationship. Make that relationship sizzle. Number 2, this is going to tilt some of you. He said the second is love your neighbor, how? As you love you. One of the greatest diseases among people of all ages in our country is people trying to figure out their value and their worth. And some of you are right there. So how do you solve that? You will only be able to love somebody else to the degree you love you, And you will only be able to learn to love you until you find out what God thinks about you. That's the second priority. That's why a lot of people get in the church and get out in ministry, and they're struggling so much with their own identity, and it's a tough run. So we take those four things. The third one is love your other believers. The fourth thing is a commitment to reaching people around us through our work, through whatever we do in daily life. What's the potential impact? Put that up there, Andrew. If you were to take 2 people a year, and at the end of the year, first year you only got 3, then you got 9. Everybody spins off and multiplies. You go to year 10, you got 59,000 people. How about that? If you put 100 people up there, you're in the millions. It's called the exponential factor in math. If you want to know his plan to change the planet, take a person, disciple the person who will disciple another person, then I'll take somebody and do the same thing. And so the potential impact is absolute. You say, well, I don't have time. I can just take one person. If you take one person for a year and do that for 10 years, at the end of that time, you'll have 1,041 people. It beats everything. So Castro, a number of years ago, we're doing great. I got 5 minutes left. So Castro, years ago in Cuba, was interviewed by a national magazine. They said, if you had your revolution to do over again, how many key people would it take? He said, well, the first time, I had about 70 to 80. He said, if I did it again, I could do it with about 4. But he said the 4 would need to be willing to die. Are you willing to die? He does call us to follow the cross. Pick up your cross, not lay it down. And so we got to really ask ourselves, are we really living this stuff out or not? We need men and women around this country, and you know who I'm really seeing get it done? Lay people. Lay people. 2 of my board members are here out of 3 today, and you can't be on our board if you're not making disciples. If I were the head, well, I better be careful about this one. Anyway, so here's the challenge. Now, I'm not going to say it. I'll get in trouble for that. I probably already am in trouble, but there you go. I'm 81, so, I just let it run off my back. So I did some research with a little help. There are 19,586 alumni that have gone through this institution. 11,244 are documented. In other words, they know where they are. They're in the computer. They've got all that set up. Those in church ministry, 3,173, or 28%. Parachurch, 2,425, or 22%. Marketplace work, 2,042, 18%. In education, 1,474, 13%. Missions, 607, 5%. Retired, 1,523, 14%. So you say, what's the point? George Hillman, I love this guy. When I first met him a few years ago, he was in my office and said, George, you got a lot of people all. He said, well, let me show you what we got. So he gets his phone out and puts a picture up of the United States, and in green, all these dots everywhere. I said, George, you could take the country. You could take the country. We got to mobilize these people. So that's what Andrew and others are working on. So anyway, my challenge is to you. If you are a professor, they said professors had to come to this now. I don't know if they're on a coffee break or they're really here or not. But if you're a professor, you need to be discipling somebody. You need to have 1 or 2 you're discipling every year, at least. If you're on the board, and the board's meeting's not now, I think tomorrow somewhere in Atlanta, every board member needs to be discipling somebody. The leadership needs to model for the whole group and school that this is important. It's not another program, it is a lifestyle. Big difference. Well, more time, this is worth gold, with fewer people makes a greater impact for Christ. More time with fewer people makes a greater impact in the lives of others for Christ. So my question to you Do you really know what matters most and what lasts forever? And Andrew, I don't know if we can stick this up or not, but if you look at Isaiah, it says the thing that's going to last forever, and it may come up, the grass withers, the flowers fall, but the word of our God stands forever, the living word and the written word forever. Two things God's going to take from the planet when it's all over. That's one. The other one is, in our passage in Matthew, we coming up here, Andrew? Yeah. Then they will go away to eternal punishment, but the righteous to eternal life. Everyone's going to live forever, either with God or without Him. And so if those are the two bottom line presuppositions, which I believe they are, then I need to spend my life with those two things. Knowing Him, loving Him, following Him. Number two, getting Him to people and people to Him. How you doing? Well, I guess my final thing I want to say is what's your excuse? Let me close with this. Noah was a drunk. Abraham was old. Isaac was a daydreamer. Jacob was a liar. Leah was ugly. Joseph was abused. Moses had a stuttering problem. Gideon was afraid. Samson had long hair and was a womanizer. Rahab was a prostitute. Jeremiah and Timothy were too young. David had an affair and was a murderer. Elijah was suicidal. Isaiah preached naked. Jonah ran from God. Naomi was a widow. Job went bankrupt. Peter denied Christ. The disciples fell asleep while praying. Martha worried about everything. The Samaritan woman was divorced more than once. Zacchaeus was too small. Paul was too religious. Timothy had an ulcer, and Lazarus was dead. So what's your excuse?